Adam and Eve are in the garden, and everything is beautiful. All the beautiful trees are there, every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. But right in the middle of the garden there are also these other two trees, tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is the especially scary one. And God says, you can eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest of it, therefore thou shalt surely die. So God has gone to all this trouble to make his little boy happy. He's given him animals, he has given him his wife Eve, he has created the perfect world for him, and then he puts a giant bear trap right in the middle. So why the heck does he do it? Why the heck does he put this big button that if Adam pushes it, everything explodes? So notice, for example, that it's not entirely clear, at least it wouldn't be clear to Adam, what is the significance of this tree. God says, you can eat of every tree, but you can't eat of this one, knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so obviously we're in big, like, metaphor land here. But if we're trying to read this as God actually relating emotionally to Adam, he says, here's the one tree you can't eat of. And it seems sort of like this do not push button. It's got to seem sort of arbitrary to Adam. Why this one tree? Now, the standard Orthodox explanation is that this is God giving Adam free will. That he needs to give people the opportunity to do wrong to prove their devotion to him. However, this part of me, I just can't help feeling like you go to all the trouble to sort of create a perfect, safe environment, and then you put this really dangerous thing right in the middle. What do you think is going to happen? Didn't you ever have kids? Well, obviously, God never did have kids. And when we look at the temptation and the fall of man, as it's called, I do think we have to think about the fact that God is surprised that this happens. He seems to be surprised. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that God knows everything, blah, blah, blah. Yes, and the sort of typical Orthodox reading is that God knows all and sees all. He knows this is going to happen. Very good. But remember, again, we're reading this as though we've just met God. He's a character. What do we know about him? We know that he cares about people. We know that he's sort of obsessive about organization and rules. And so, it sort of makes sense that here's a guy who assumes that Adam is going to be like him. God says, I've got everything fixed up for you. Everything's in order. You can do this, you can do that, and you can't do this. And Adam's going to follow the rules. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the serpent shows up, and the serpent talks Eve into eating of the fruit. But let's look a little more carefully at this. Now, woman said unto the serpent, so the serpent says, can you eat of every tree of the garden? The woman says, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And there's a funny thing here with neither shall you touch it, because in fact that's not what God said. He said, in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And Eve says this thing about touching it. Now maybe we just didn't get the earlier version, but it's odd. It sounds to me, if you listen to the way Eve is talking, it sounds to me like she's parroting back what she's heard, which is what you're supposed to do when your parent gives you a rule, right? We can do this, but we can't do this. And it's like she embellishes it a little. She adds this little, neither shall we touch it. We can't get anywhere near it. It's really bad. And the serpent says, ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods. Bear in mind, Adam and Eve don't know what it means to die. Bear in mind that it does seem to be the case this being the knowledge of good and evil, and the fact that Adam and Eve immediately after eating the fruit, it says their eyes are opened. The snake sort of seems to be telling the truth here. But I think the most important thing about this Eve temptation scene is the explanation we get for why Eve does it. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat. So the reasons reasons given for why Eve does it is she looks at it. Remember I said before about how suspicious the Bible is of looking? She looks at it and it looks pretty and it looks yummy. And the snake says it'll make me smart. God has created a landscape with all the trees that are most beautiful and best for food. That's what it says. So Eve says, well, this is a whole place full of pretty things that are good to eat. Kind of makes sense. God says I'll die. Snake says I won't die. I don't really know what dying is. And here comes God. And I love this verse because, like, they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. I love the idea that God, like, only comes out when it's cool. Like, because he might get sunburn, you know? He's like, there's God. He's the happy zucchini man, right? He's walking along. He's got his straw hat on. Apparently he comes out every evening when it gets cool, around, cocktail hour. And he comes and he visits Adam and Eve. And he says, hi kids, how are we doing? How do the zucchinis look today, God is happy. He's got his garden, he's got his people, he's got his animals and his plants. And Adam and Eve hide, and the Lord God calls unto them. So, he's looking around, he's got his box of zucchinis he wants to show off. And Adam does the classic thing, the classic little kid thing. Adam says, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked. Duh! It's like, yeah, I didn't want to get you mad because I broke the window. Oh, shoot! It's like, oh, shoot! And God immediately says, who told thee that thou was naked? He goes from happy cucumber man to being this guy. He's like, what? What did you do? So you have to say Adam and Eve are pretty darn bad at being, disobedient. He's hiding. So he's hiding. He's hiding because God will see that he's naked. So when God asks him where he is, he says, I'm over here. I'm hiding because I'm naked. Anyway, God picks it up immediately. Who told thee thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree where I commanded thee that thou shouldst not eat? And Adam, again, does the classic little kid thing. Adam says, it's her fault. And not only is it her fault, but it's your fault. The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. Hey, if you hadn't, made that girl for me, I wouldn't be, sinning. Oh, sorry. There's God again. And Eve, God asks Eve, what is it that thou hast done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. Now, one of the things we're going to keep trying to do is seeing if we can get emotional tone out of this. And what strikes me here is how many questions God asks. He's like, where are you? Who said you were naked? Did you eat of the tree? What have you done? It's like he's surprised. He's like, what? What's happening? Who told you were naked? God honestly seems surprised. He honestly seems shocked. And then he honestly seems angry. He immediately turns around and he curses Adam and Eve. He curses the snake first. And then he curses Adam and Eve. And let's look carefully at this curse because it shows you a lot about God, how God feels. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. So, the curse on Eve is menstrual cramps and labor pains. Nice. What does God care about? we already figured out he really cares about reproduction. He loves the idea of reproduction. The first thing he says to Adam and Eve is, have babies. So it's like he hones in on the thing he loves most and makes it horrible. And also with Adam, he makes the process of reproduction in the world horrible. The reproduction of plants. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. In sorrow, Eve has babies. In sorrow, Adam grows plants in the earth. And this is a great example of that Hebrew thing I was talking about with the puns. Cursed is the ground, Adamah, till you return to the ground, Adamah. And listen to God's tone here. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, from out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. You're going to be miserable and in pain, and it's going to suck, and then you're going to lie down in the dirt and be dead, because you came out of the dirt, and you're going to go back into the dirt like the dirty, dead dog you are. There's so much anger here, and it is directed so specifically at the thing that was so beautiful. What was beautiful about Eden? That the trees were so beautiful, that they grew so well, that Adam could tend them, that it was a world that bore the seeds within itself, that could reproduce. And so God is focusing, it almost seems to me, honestly, like he's focusing it on the thing he loves the most, as much as he's focusing it on Adam and Eve. I want to take a little sort of side trip here and talk about the nakedness issue. Now, we always see Adam and Eve portrayed, and they're always like naked people. And it makes clear that the very first thing they notice when they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that they're naked. So that's always struck me as odd. I mean, nakedness, why would nakedness be the first thing? Why wouldn't it be that they realize that they don't like each other, or that they're angry, that they have negative emotions? I mean, nakedness is the sort of definition of good and evil. It seems strange. And obviously, it has a tendency, I think, to sort of sexualize the whole scene. Looking throughout the Bible, and for that matter, looking throughout the horrible parts of human history, nakedness is always associated with pain and vulnerability. In wartime, people who are imprisoned, people who are oppressed, one of the things that's always done is that they're always stripped naked. This is this famous horrible picture of the girl with napalm on her body from the Vietnam War. And her nakedness there is about pain and being vulnerable and being weak. So when God allows, when Adam and Eve see their nakedness, what they see is their own frailty, and that's why they're frightened, and that's why they hide. And throughout the Bible, nakedness always, to be revealed, is a terrifying thing, and nakedness is always associated with disempowerment. And so when God makes them coats of skins, he's being loving in a certain way. He's trying to protect them again. Of course, there's something really horrible also about the fact that these are the skins of the animals that he made for Adam as friends. He kills the animals and takes their skins and makes them into clothes. And it's after, the general belief is that after the fall of man, people start eating meat. Before that, they only ate vegetables in the Garden of Eden. And also that death comes into the world. Now, it's a little murky, to be honest. The general belief is that people become mortal. They would never have died. Without the sin in the Garden of Eden, there would have been no death. People become mortal. God says, on that day you shall die. Well, they don't actually die on that day, but they sort of eventually die is the idea. So their lives become miserable, the recreation of life becomes miserable, and they die. But there's something really striking to me here at the end of this curse. Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, cursed is the ground. Dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. So this is the final curse, is on Adam. And it ends with this image of death. You will die. You will return to dust. You're going into the ground. Next verse, though, so that's 3:19. Next verse, 3:20, and Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Eve in Hebrew is Cheva, which is life. Now that's really weird and sudden juxtaposition. Why didn't we see him call her Eve before? Before it says he called her woman because she was taken out of man. But here is when he names her. And he names her life. He names her life immediately after God has said, you will die. And he turns to his wife and he says, your name is life. And it almost seems like I see that love triangle here again. So as they're alienated from God, Adam and Eve turn towards one another and become closer. And it's almost like he's weirdly embracing life, human life, in the midst of death. We end the chapter 3, the curse section, with this sort of vivid image, really honestly the most vivid image we've gotten up to this point in the Bible, of God putting the cherub, the angel with the flaming sword, outside of Eden. And it's this very strange and mystical reason. This verse 3:22, people speculated about, first of all, who's God talking to? The man is become as one of us, to know good and evil, and now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever, we have to get rid of him. So the tree of life presumably makes you live forever. I thought they lived forever anyway. I guess he would live forever in sin now. It's a very, quirky. It reminds me more of the sort of magical quality of those other creation myths, and this final image of the cherub. So cherubs in the Bible, cherubim, are not those little adorable little angels you see flying around, little fat angels. They're these sort of kick-ass warrior angels who have like a whole bunch of wings and big swords and stuff. And he puts the cherubim with the flaming sword, and that's the last thing we see, is this image of like violent intensity. God, who had been this sort of sweet old gardener man, has suddenly become this fierce, terrifying being. And we don't. There actually aren't a lot of portrayals of angels in the Bible, but I did find one image that sort of, it seems to me, is a good example of what this cherub must have looked like. This guy is my hero. Check him out. 50 cal when you need to reach out and touch someone. He's got the flint. That's what Adam and Eve were looking back on. No wonder they were worried. So Adam and Eve are out of the garden, and they've entered this world of dying things, sort of like this, and misery and pain and sadness, and yet Adam says, this is my wife. Her name is Eve, or life.